Welcome. My name is Emmett McGregor, CEO of SciPhy Systems. Thank you very much for joining us on Plants to Plants, the hemp and cannabis processing seminar series. Today on Plants to Plants, we're going to be taking a look at how companies can boost their profitability in their processing operations by engaging with some of the hottest topics of the day, including derived cannabinoid manufacturing and purification, what the regulatory scene looks like for those products, and how companies can really take a run at gaining market share there and protecting themselves in a market that's demanding safer and better validated products. We'll also be talking about the broader efficiency gains that are being made through technology and equipment changes in the processing space, and how companies can best utilize those technologies to manufacture high demand goods like acid form cannabinoids and just generally take a better stand in the market for good market share and ongoing returns as competition continues to increase. If you have any questions or comments for us to engage with, please post in the Q&A section or in the chat. This is an opportunity we'd really like to take to engage with our audience, and is the first of what we hope will be many episodes where we bring our in-house expertise to the table and start to get more feedback from the community. So please do comment and question anything that's coming to your mind. That said, let's move straight into the panel. Today, joining us, we have Brandon Colletti, who's our client relations manager and one of our key sales staff, who some of you may have seen. Also, many years of experience in the cannabis space, including being a processing operator himself, as well as touching on many other cannabis operations. We have John Mark Herring, our technical director and founding partner of the company, probably the deepest expertise in processing technologies across the board, and our domain expert in all of the cannabis processing and botanical processing details and technologies that we leverage today. We also have Steve Fuhr, our business operations coordinator, as well as sales manager, focused on outbound sales and client relations. So some of you may have had communications with him in the past. Again, many years in the cannabis and hemp space, operating processing operations, building cannabis businesses, cultivation side as well as processing. So the topic today is profitable processing. I'd like to open up with a really hot topic that I think is the top of many people's minds. It's really seeing a lot of change right now in the regulatory framework and some big opportunities to push forward in this space. And that's the derived cannabinoids, cannabinoids produced through semi-synthetic processes like Delta-8, HHC, Delta-9 THC being produced from CBD. And I'd like to start the conversation around the opportunity for generating new profits by focusing on safe products, pure products, and the regulatory environment that's rapidly changing out there for these products. One thing I think we can start with there is the opportunity for legal Delta-9 produced from hemp plants and the change in the marketplace. I wondered if Brandon, maybe if you want to start off telling us a little bit about what you're seeing there in the field around changes to some of these state markets, Michigan, Nevada, and some of these other states out there. Do you see people talking about any specific opportunities for generating profit in those markets?
It's interesting you asked that. In fact, a lot of companies are going to semi-synthetic derived cannabinoids such as CBD isolate. And the reason for that is because of the low cost to produce a Delta-9 THC molecule. I'm sure all of us know and have seen over the last few years, with the crash or somewhat market adjustment of the CBD industry as a whole, around 2019, 2018, we're looking for new ways to stay profitable, particularly tapping the CBD and hemp markets. And the isolate market is a really good one because of the low cost of entry and also the ability to have a profitable product come from that particular starting material, such as CBD isolate. A few different states are starting to regulate the derivative markets, and that would be a semi-synthetic derivative market, such as Michigan, as Emmett stated, and that they are beginning to say, okay, you can produce these semi-synthetic cannabinoids, but with some caveats. And what that means exactly is that the regulatory bodies are going to want a very clean and safe product. Now, Michigan in particular, they are taking steps to limit the amount of D8. And I'm not sure how many of you folks are familiar with D8. It's a THC compound, but a different bond in a different spot of that compound, which makes it slightly different than D9. And Michigan's taken steps to limit the amount, something very akin to what most states do in the hemp market for THC regulatory limits. They're taking steps to limit the amount of D8 in semi-synthetic cannabinoid production for D9. So it's very interesting, and I would suspect that there'd be quite a few more states that are going to follow suit in that sort of regulatory manner there to limit what particular cannabinoids are going to be allowed in synthetic production and which ones are not. Nevada is another state that they have, amongst a handful of others, that have explicitly outlawed the production of D8. Colorado being another, where I'm calling you guys from now, it's explicitly not allowed to produce D8, even from a hemp-derived CBD isolate, for example. It's just not going to be allowed. So it'll be interesting to see, but we have certainly seen lots and lots of companies enter the space specifically to manufacture these derivatives because it is shown to be quite profitable.
Yeah, I think a key thing there with Michigan and Nevada as well is there's indications that the regulators are actually bringing those psychoactive cannabinoids, be they Delta 8, Delta 9, Delta 10, any cannabinoid that's being defined as psychoactive is being brought out of the hemp market where it's sold just broadly to consumers and into the recreational adult use cannabis market. So they're allowing hemp basically derived cannabinoids to come into the rec market, but then they're saying you have to meet all the regulatory standards for safety, supply chain management, tracking and filing into, metric or whatever seed to sale tracking system they're using. So the bar is really being raised on product quality in that market, and that means that producers that are able to prove that they're producing really high quality ingredients are gaining some protection to their market. Now, John, I think maybe you could speak to the analytical challenges behind really how do you vet if your product is quality and how do we get towards a better, cleaner process for producing these semi-synthetic derived cannabinoids?
Yeah, it's a big elephant in the room. Many people are well aware of it at this point. A year ago, it was a lot worse of a situation. There were a lot of products on retail shelves that were very crude, not good examples of what this industry is capable of. But a good example of what this industry is capable of has shown itself over the past year and continues to. There's still a lot of work to be done. There are analytical challenges. They are improving. The number of labs out there who can, have validated methods for discerning and resolving, some of these side products are growing. A year ago, there may have been one or two of those laboratories, analytical laboratories. There are still laboratories, analytical labs in the market that are not really advancing at the pace, but I think that'll work itself out. here over time. But yeah, CBD is a great starting material for making psychoactive cannabinoids, and there are a handful that are not on the market just yet. And as people bring new ones to the market, new analytical challenges, present themselves. So I think the industry is more prepared now than it was a year ago to, quickly adapt and ensure consumer safety. But yeah, there's still work to be done. It's not as, reaction chemistry, I wish it was, as easy as A plus B equals C, and it's all you get and it's all it'll make. It's never the case, especially, when working with compounds such as this. The reaction chemistry has been optimized in some of these processes to mitigate side products. We'd have to do pretty thorough safety studies to be 100% sure that some of these side products are completely safe to consume. I think they're relatively safe to consume. People are getting better at, cleaning up their reaction mixture. So, there never should have been an excuse and for leaving, catalysts or any of that in your product. I think those days are far gone. I hope they are. So yeah, it's a rapidly evolving marketplace sector of the hemp cannabis world. It's exciting, and it brings up new challenges, which I think this industry has the chops to collectively grow, mature, and adapt as moving forward.
Yeah, so it's coming towards the end of a the era where there's mystery peaks that either get lumped in with your Delta 9 THC number or just get ignored entirely, getting closer and closer to full characterization of all these not only the minor cannabinoids that are characterized from the cannabis plant, but also some of these side products produced by the less controlled semi-synthetic reaction chemistry that's being done. And that's crucial. And I think regulators are starting to indicate they're taking this very seriously, starting to look at more in-depth, detailed analytical methods to base their regulatory decisions on. So that's really, I think, important. It's important for the industry to know that that's coming down the pipeline. They're going to want you to be able to validate your method and validate that what you're producing is, in fact, at least known in specific what it is you're producing. So Steve, you have tend to keep a good track of the sort of national headlines and news and what's coming down the pipeline. Do you see any big changes other than what we've talked about so far coming down the line for these derived cannabinoids as an opportunity space for hemp and cannabis producers?
I do, not just at the national level, but the international level. In fact, in today's news, we noticed that New York is, the Senate's passed a rule that's allowing hemp farmers to also potentially grow and process cannabis. And I think that in a lot of markets, there's been this vertical integration of producers, processors, and retailers. And I think we're going to start to see a melding of the hemp and the cannabis fields. We're going to start to see CBD as a catalyst for a lot of typical cannabinoids. And that kind of brings me through towards the European market, because that's a market where they really look at all cannabinoids as one, rather than segregating THC outside of CBD or some of the other minors. And in these markets, I think that you're going to see CBD and THC growing hand in hand. And the standards and the rules that they bring forth are going to start to come together as one.
Yeah, we saw some news earlier today about in Switzerland, which does have a separate regulatory system from the EU, but where they treat CBD as an allowable ingredient, but they have very rigorous quality standards that they've shut down more than 50% of the products that were coming to market recently through blind studies of the safety standards for those products and some of the trace contaminants in those products. And So they took a really heavy-handed regulatory approach to that and came and basically recalled a huge percentage of the products on the market. So that is an example of what can happen for producers that are trying to sneak by, is a really important lesson. And not only that, but it means that those operators that were validated and very safe in their production and had really good tracking now have a huge profit opportunity because their competition has just gone down precipitously. So I think looking at that and seeing that coming down the pipeline, not only for Europe, but also for potentially US state by state, but also on a federal level, and then in other markets like South America and Canada, similar situations starting to arise. Yes, I'd like to encourage everybody, all of our attendees, if you have any questions or comments, please do post those in the chat or Q&A section below. We'd love to answer your questions today while we have everybody on the line. So before we move on from the derivative cannabinoids, I want to sort of see, does anybody in the panel have any questions for the crowd here? Or general comments? No? Well, one last thought for me. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
Well, I was going to say the one question. So I recently came across a group in Oregon yesterday that a GMP certified facility, GMP certified to SOPs, and they've just they've applied for and are close to receiving their novel food status in Europe to be able to sell and import into Europe. And I guess my question to any of the panelists is, has anyone here explored that profit potential of doing a novel food application in Europe? I don't see resounding.
I would say I haven't specifically for the novel food filing. What I know is that once you have that filing, you have a lot more flexibility in terms of bringing a new product to market, and you have specifically a separate sort of code for your product that you can use to sell it as a validated and safe to use and regulatorily approved ingredient for manufacturers in Europe. What I do know is that other ingredient manufacturers with EU GMP approvals have been selling CBD into Europe, specifically through select countries where they have a CBD regulation in place on a national level that allows importing CBD, and then sometimes those products are then exported out into the rest of the EU. What I'm guessing is, and this is just speculation, but I'm guessing that that dietary ingredient filing they're talking about would then allow them to effectively address the entire European market without having to be selective about which country they're selling into. And of course, that means a huge increase in potential customer base, which is great.
It's huge. I mean, right now, CBD in Europe is the sales are parallel with vitamin C and vitamin D combined. And a recent academic group released a study that said in a very short period of time, CBD sales could outstrip all of those type of nutrapharmaceutical vitamins within the next year or two. So it's a really growing market.
And the big lesson there was that they, of course, came in with CBD unregulated for, I guess, a couple of years in the EU before then shutting the entire market down, saying that CBD was illegal. And then after a year plus of rulemaking, then came back and said, okay, no, it is going to be allowable, but you have to meet the CGMP requirements for nutraceuticals in the EU, and there's going to be restrictions on, basically safety testing as well for the product. So that's, a big lesson there. Again, some people went all in, unregulated, built unregulated facilities, and then completely shut down and went on ice. So a lesson there beyond just taking advantage of regulatory opportunities by being the foremost validated and safe market is diversifying your market as well, selling to multiple markets and trying not to pigeonhole yourself in a single sales outlet, because folks, depending on the EU, had a real trouble, so they had to look to other sales outlets, and those that did succeeded more. So to that point, Um, well, one thing before we move on to point out regulatory models, we've talked about the model where basically all Delta 8 and everything is getting put into a rec model. I think it's worth talking about Oregon as an example, though, because that's a little bit different as it stands today. It looks like what they're doing is establishing the requirement that all psychoactive or all derived cannabinoid products have to be tested in a OLCC or the rec market approved laboratories, but they're continuing to allow the sale of hemp-derived products, including Delta 9 at below 0.3% THC and Delta 8 in mass market stores outside of the adult use dispensary model, but they're requiring testing and safety procedures that meet the same standards. So we'll see on a national level which direction it goes, but either way, the indicator is safety regulation and being validated by third-party testing labs for these products in a more rigorous manner is almost certain to be a national requirement, whether it's rolled out state by state or on a federal level very soon. Yes, Steve?
Well, it's important to point out that that safety factor isn't just a product of the products being made, but there's been some big issues in regards to the labs that are producing these materials. There's been some, we've all heard of the garages and that explode because they don't have a C1D1 butane lab. But what we're starting to hear more of is in this world of reactionary chemistry. These reactions can be dangerous not only in terms of explosiveness, but they can produce toxins that, John, maybe you can share your story. You've got a gentleman that has had a couple problems with that.
Yeah, I mean, we're just entering a new era in cannabis processing. And this era involves reaction chemistry. No longer is it, pretty much focused on separation science alone, which, covers your extraction, your filtration, winterization. People are doing actual, chemical reactions with sometimes some rather dangerous catalyst reagents in the mix, and that brings with it a whole new world for this industry in regards to the safety considerations. Yeah, some of these processes.
We've heard stories of people that have, of course, I'm working with a father right now that unfortunately his son was killed in an accident down in California a couple months ago. You, I think, had mentioned you were working with a gentleman that had to go through kidney dialysis because of inhaling some of the fumes. Is that right?
I mean, that's just one example. And these, a lot of folks, members of our community, it's out there. There are various ways people can harm themselves. They're not taking care. There's chronic and there's acute. Be aware of both of those. And, I think the rush to make these isomers and these compounds, led to, a lot of folks jumping into it. It's tough to say, but it's important to be as safe as possible and cautious as possible. Fully understand what you're doing, what you're taking on. You can read it on the internet, you can read it on a forum. Sounds easy, looks like a simple cake baking recipe. It may not be, and a lot of times, all the safety considerations are not spelled out, when we are discussing these things in an online forum format. But yeah, there's more than a couple of new ways people can get hurt or harmed, in the production of cannabis products now. I don't really see that as a bad thing per se. I mean, it's the maturation of the industry. Really excited to see everyone leveling up on their, chemistry skills and their safety awareness, bringing in these newer processes or processes newer to this industry, into this industry. It's exciting to think about where we all will be and what we will be doing in the next 5 years. But yes, in order to enjoy that, we must be aware and practice the utmost safety.
Yeah, I'd love to see more people using not only minimum requirement OSHA type approvals, but really getting a OSHA and workforce safety specialist like an industrial hygienist involved in planning out your process when you scale it up, especially so that you have a safety professional that can talk to you about PPE, about appropriate environment and hazard mitigation plans and safety, hazard response plans as well. I think the hazard response in some of these reaction chemistry processes are very different than what people are used to in just handling solvents. So it takes a more detailed level of nuance on your safety plan.
Exactly. And it's very important that those, if you're bringing in a new process like a hydrogenation into your lab, it is important that you let your local fire department, attorneys having or authorities of jurisdiction, let them know what you're using, what your process is, even if you're not required to do so. It's very important, not just for your life, but for the lives of the people who are going to come help you and others if something, something bad happens. And bad things happen to good chemists. Just because you have an accident does not mean that you are a bad chemist. You could be very, aware. Accidents happen. We're entering territory where new dangers exist. It's important we are aware of them and we plan, for the worst case scenario. And, in that, as these processes are scaling up, people are trying to make large amounts, maybe we start looking towards alternative approaches, versus batch-based reactors, go into flow chemistry-based processes, which are, inherently much more safe. You just have a lot smaller quantity of solvent in contact with that catalyst at a given time. It's also much more productive. And, our theme at SciPhy is OpEx, right? Bringing down that operational expense. And, it already kind of is a race to the bottom with some of these products. And that hinges on efficient, scalable reaction chemistry. And flow chemistry, answers some of these challenges that are just now really starting to exist for the broader range of operations out there making these compounds.
Right, and to speak to flow chemistry, for those of you who don't know, essentially we're talking about a continuous process where the reagents, the catalyst, any of the compounds involved in the reaction are actually flowed through a mechanism that contacts them for a set amount of time and then separates them. So your actual in-process volume of reagents that are undergoing the reaction is kept to a minimum. And also the contact of that reaction with the broader amount of materials that you're handling is also greatly reduced. So that reduces your hazard profile a lot and is very common in the pharmaceutical industry for this reason and is gaining a lot of traction recently as people are really starting to perfect these methods. So it's sort of a state of the art for other reaction chemistry processes and is viewed as having a great improvement in safety profile. One point I'll just throw out there, of course, this is a SciPhy Systems program. We do have a new product, XyPut, which is specifically for continuously separating liquid streams. It also has a continuous mixing stage upstream of it in certain configurations. So if you're interested in exploring how we can help you to improve or implement a flow chemistry process, please reach out to us. We have a lot to talk to you about on that side. I see a message from the crowd here I didn't want to gloss over. There was a mention about NMR testing and about 18 months of validation. Yes, some of these regulatory environments, we're talking about very big barriers to entry. NMR is a very advanced analytical method that characterizes and differentiates between compounds that may not be easily resolved using something like HPLC or even GCMS. It allows for very detailed analysis of the molecular structure of compounds so that you can know how many compounds there are, because sometimes peaks do overlap with these other analytical methods. So seeing folks going out there proactively and using these advanced analytical methods to characterize their mixture, we're going to see more and more of this. Some states may start requiring that your characterization be done to a degree that could require these more in-depth analytical methods, especially when you're talking about reactive type chemistries. So be aware of that. And if you're going into a new state, start having those conversations with regulators as soon as possible. And the last thing I'll say about what John just mentioned is don't just tell your authorities having jurisdiction and your fire department. Once you resolve what your hazard mitigation plan is, what your PPE is, all the safety measures that you're putting in place, make sure you tell your insurance company because they are going to rate you at the highest risk unless you tell them what you're doing to reduce your risk profile, and they're learning on the job, just as we are, what the best methods are for implementing safety procedures there. So rates are going to start to be set based on meeting these new industry standards for safety that are closer and closer to other industries like pharmaceutical. So that is another way to protect yourself and increase your profitabilities. Make sure you're paying as little as possible for insurance while maximizing the safety of your facility. I see Steve has a comment there.
Well, yeah, when you're talking about profitability and you're talking about these reactions, ultimately you're talking about chromatography. In our industry, I tell people if you've spent $1.5 or $2 million building your facility out, you could easily spend $5 or $6 or $7 million on chromatography to handle that level of throughput. And when you buy traditional HPLC, simulated moving bed, or a centrifugal chromatography systems, you find yourself spending a lot of money on staff because the staff is very expensive. You start spending a lot of money on media. I think Brandon a couple of weeks ago had a client who's spending $6,500 a day on media. You start to spend a lot of money on solvent. There's folks out there spending $3,000 or $4,000 a day on solvents, and then those solvents become part of a big waste stream that becomes very expensive. So to the extent that you can find less expensive ways, both at the CapEx and OpEx level, of doing these type of reactions, fractionations, and also removing, I use the word impurities, but that impurity might be THC out of CBD, or it could be a pesticide. To the extent you can reduce those costs, you'll improve your profit. And that's where things like XyPut might dramatically reduce costs in those operations.
Right, and with SciPhy in particular, because it is such a multi-application technology that it has, fundamentally it separates a aqueous phase from a non-polar from a non-polar type liquid stream. So the types of applications that can open up are huge and numerous. So right now we're looking for people to do that research with us hand in hand and find the best applications, and it can be a proprietary technology to your business that will give you a huge edge up. So as far as another opportunity for increasing your profit potential, if you can do something that no one else can, and you have a proprietary process built on a only of its kind technology platform, that's a really great way to defend your market share and increase your profitability overall. So let's move on now to talk more broadly about operational efficiency and how it contributes to profitability. This has been a big theme for some of our past discussions, but it's always worth basically emphasizing at any chance we have when we get more information in. So I wonder if, Steve, you wanted to talk specifically about energy rebates and energy efficiency, since I know you've been deep into that world recently.
Yeah, well, the statement I make to folks that's worth repeating here is that I think membrane technology, in a very general sense, is changing the entire extraction process. And we use the membranes in the XyPut system instead of using a media. But in things like solvent recovery, terpene recovery, dewaxing, we're able to use membrane systems like the X Spiral from Molecular Forces to do these tasks at near ambient temperature. And because we can do these, again, solvent recovery at near ambient rather than needing a falling film to get the oil very hot and then needing some type of cryo system to get it really cold to dewax. The energy savings are so dramatic that the state programs that offer energy incentives or rebates to businesses are recognizing this technology. And some states are paying between 70 and 100% of the cost of the machine. So for the sake of the conversation, if the machine costs $50,000, depending on whether you retrofit it or you're doing it new construction, you could get 70 to 100% of the cost of that machine paid for. The other important part, that of course is a CapEx reduction, but some of these membranes are operating at 10% the energy usage of a traditional system. So you start to get compound savings, which all goes to your bottom profitability line when you start to employ these membranes. And with the energy rebates, the states and PUDs are recognizing that now in the cannabis industry.
Great. And actually, you spoke about the different types of membranes that have been used. I think it's important to note that there have been membranes that were the first generation deployed into the industry that saw some difficulties, but there's been a real effort to continue innovating and improving membrane performance. I wonder if, John Mark, you might comment on that, what the sort of general membrane improvement trend has been.
Yeah, it's one of the things that has me most excited these days is membrane-based technologies. As Steve was saying, not having to, go through phase change to evaporate and condense saves a lot of energy here. And there's other separations that can be done in membranes as well that are very exciting. And, just even 2 years ago, the skids and, membranes used and applied to this industry and our processes, they worked, but there were issues. And today's skids, that people are putting out, all companies are, greatly improved. And it's a real good example of how the cannabis industry is ready to take on, emerging technologies and optimize them for the use and application in our industry here, which ends up working in the benefit for other natural products as well, or other just similar processes. Organic solvent nanofiltration is it's not brand new technology, but it's also not as old and tried and true as distillation, right? And there are hundreds of potential membranes for dewaxing, for solvent recovery. And it is very exciting. And it's, one of these things you have to test them. You have to get the data. And sometimes you may be pleasantly surprised at the results you get.
Right. So the key thing there is that, just because one membrane had a specific problem doesn't mean that membranes at large are not going to be profitable for your business. One major shift is the first sets of membranes we saw go into the business were very expensive per membrane, and still for some specific applications, more expensive long lifetime membranes are a better fit. But the entry level for ethanol solvent recovery dewax membranes is now, I'd say less than 20% of the cost of what the first generation that came to market were. So really the cost savings and the operational efficiencies are just continuing to improve with this technology, even as capabilities also improve.
Emmett, if I could add just one thing to that it's
Sure.
not just the expense of buying the membranes. We've had clients who have membranes that cost $7,000 or $8,000 every 5 or 6 weeks, and one dirty crude load going through it can foul them if they don't watch it. And so it's they're expensive to operate and replace. They're just very expensive. Not all of them, but some of them.
Yeah, I'm seeing Lincoln from the audience here commenting that they base their entire business around using membranes, and it saved them a huge amount of operating expense. The people in the field that have gotten these built in to their business and effectively integrated them into their process are not looking back. There are folks who have seen challenges that get discouraged, but really a new generation of membranes going with a different vendor for your membranes. Even if you've already bought hardware from a different vendor, you can explore options to improve your performance with the new membranes. And looking at general botanical industry, I know, Brandon, you had a recent example of an opportunity to save cost that was a perfect example of even established industries looking at membranes as a huge advantage.
That's precisely right. It's a supplements manufacturer in Europe. They implement a falling film evaporator for their solvent recovery in an aqueous solution. Quote, the gentleman said he would be a hero in his company if he could save the steam cost. They spent 16,000 euros in 1 month just in steam to boil up that solution. So just as Lincoln outlined there, it is very, and John Mark as well, it's very expensive to do phase changes. So membranes are absolutely the future, and definitely something to be looking out for to implement in your facility as well.
Great. And here's an interesting question. Maybe John Mark, you'll have a comment on this. Jason says, what about membrane recovery with a biphasic solvent system? And Jason, if you could comment with a little more detail about what you have in mind, but I think we might get some ideas here.
Yeah, let's get a little more color. It'd be a fun one to discuss. And it's totally possible there's membrane processes I'm not aware of, haven't heard of, because there are a lot of things you can do with membranes. I mean, one similar example, right, is the XyPut. There is a membrane inside the XyPut, but that membrane is not a size exclusion, nanofiltration membrane. It's a flat sheet, and it's based on, the hydrophobicity or not of, the solution and the substrate. So there's likely something you can do with a biphasic system and a membrane, but yeah, if we get some more color there, we could discuss.
Yep, and actually XyPut has been used for separating gas out of liquid streams as well. So there's an example there of a biphasic separation that's been used for. When we look at other industries also, you have things like your pervaporation type membranes where they're actually boiling a gas phase, vapor phase out of a liquid through a membrane interface. And that is another interesting area of activity that we have looked at and are continuing to try and find the most cost-effective and streamlined solution for customers to offer with that technology, because it does have some big advantages, but the technicality of how it's implemented is very detailed engineering that's required for that, and getting it wrong could be very costly for a client. So we're taking the long road in terms of making sure we get the right technology and the right design into the hands of customers. But yeah, there are many examples of membranes being used with biphasic systems for successful separations. Let's see, Jason's talking about a CPC chromatography operator, and the final fractions are biphasic. Interesting. Yes, using a separator membrane at the end of a CPC type process. When you say biphasic, just to be clear, are you talking about like a gas and a liquid phase, or are you talking about a polar and non-polar, an aqueous and non-aqueous type mixture?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, because the truth is, either way, the answer is yes, absolutely. There are membranes out there that can be used for those separations, some more easily and readily than others. Obviously, trying to separate pure water out of an aqueous solution can be a very difficult challenge, for example, but there's advancements being made on that all the time. And I see Steve had a comment.
Well, yeah, I think as I look at what Jason's saying, he might be getting closer to what XyPut does, because the essence of XyPut is a membrane with two different properties, or two different membranes. One is hydrophobic and one is hydrophilic, and they actually work with a bank of dozens of different solvents to go through that system. And those systems can be put in series. So you may have one, we'll call it an extraction process in the series that's using a hydrophilic membrane, and then another stage that's using a completely separate solvent and using a hydrophobic membrane. And you can actually put those in series so that the end result in a continuous process is your complete separation, or at least a high degree of separation based on the partitioning coefficient.
Right. Give us a call, Jason. Let's get some more information. I think, XyPut may be a good fit for you.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, SciPut began in biphasic separations. That's really the crux, and then went out into a bunch of different other arenas, such as our industry as well. So probably something we could help with.
Yep, absolutely. Well, are there any other comments on operational efficiency? We are, we're deep into our time. We want to encourage everybody, if you have any questions or comments, thank you very much, Jason, Lincoln, and Jack, all for commenting. If anybody else or anyone who's already commented has additional questions, please send them now. We have about 10 minutes left on the webcast with our experts here, and we would love to focus on the subject matter that you want to hear about most. I think that one factor that was in our listing that we should definitely comment on, though, is the boom in interest recently for acid form cannabinoids, specifically CBDA, CBGA. I've gotten a big boost from the recent Oregon State study indicating that they may have a binding affinity for the spike protein on the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So that's bringing a big peak of interest. Now, of course, traditional manufacturing methods relying on distillation for purification will not work when you're needing to target acid form cannabinoids. So focusing on low temperature processes producing high purity extracts is a real clear opportunity there. So, one thing that I'll say for all of us is that we love light hydrocarbon extraction for this purpose. If you're trying to keep acid forms maintained to the utmost, then extracting cold and doing solvent recovery, specifically cold, all the way down to your ppm levels that you need for compliance, is light hydrocarbon really shines in that application. But we're also seeing increases in, demand for crystalline forms of the acid forms. Now, I don't think we have enough time today to get into any detail about those processes, but I want to just open it up to the crowd to say anything you want to say about, do you think that this is going to stick around? Why, other than just this study, are there other reasons that acid form cannabinoids might see ongoing increased demand? And is there anything about processing those that we want to bring to the table given our short amount of time we have today? So please raise your hand if you want to comment. Otherwise, maybe, yeah, there's Steve.
I have a quick comment about that, and that is that, when I try to explain to people that are not in this industry, the difference between a decarboxylated molecule, and we use THC as an example, where, if you were to eat THCA, you wouldn't get high. Whereas if you decarb it and then eat THC, of course, we all know the effect is there. But the thing that I think sometimes people don't realize is there is a different pharmacological effect of each of these cannabinoids if they're in acidic form. And there's been studies done in Israel and other countries that show different rates of uptake, different rates of bioavailability are actually considerably higher with the acidic form. And so hopefully the more our government allows us to do these studies, we'll be able to prove these things out.
Yes, absolutely. That even without using bioavailability enhancing techniques like nano encapsulation or using some of the sugar binding agents to allow it to be more non-polar, that just as a raw acid form oil, the CBDA and THCA and some of the other acid forms show just higher absorption into the blood serum when consumed orally, and especially also when consumed via other methods such as inhalants. So very promising work there, and we're just starting to see enough interest in that ingredient that hopefully the mass market manufacturers of products will start to emphasize acid form cannabinoids in their general marketing and build a new demand for what is a very high value ingredient right now. We're seeing this, basically between 2 and up to 5 times the value of the acid forms, in some cases even higher when you talk about, CBD crystalline versus CBDA crystalline. You're talking about, maybe 10x the value on that per kilo. So a big opportunity for operators that can produce it effectively, but it takes a more nuanced process to isolate those crystals. But what we will say is it's worth pursuing. There are operators doing it. It is feasible to crystallize CBDA. It's feasible to crystallize some of the other acid form cannabinoids. And even using equipment that you may have, you may need some augmentation to your equipment, but those processes are feasible and they're feasible at scale. So don't dismiss them as being something that you can't do. And we would love to have conversations about how we might help your business to do those processes and to reduce your waste streams through some of the separations and solvent recovery type equipment that we can provide to you. So, Steve, looked like you had a comment.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, from a purely chemical standpoint, if you're capturing the acidic form, or should I say leaving it in the acidic form, your yields automatically go up by 13%. So that goes right to your bottom line.
Right. Not only are they more valuable per kilo, but you're producing more kilos per pound or per kilo of biomass. So that's very good point there. Let's see. Another point on the acid form cannabinoid sort of train here, it's worth mentioning, is that the buzz specifically around addressing COVID is not just for acid form, it's also for CBD itself. So the decarboxylated form. There's a study out of the University of Illinois that shows that CBD decarboxylated form is potentially even more efficacious than the acid form CBD at helping to reduce the, we'll say, symptomatic expression of COVID in a broader population. And this was done as an observational study in the University of Illinois Medical Center in conjunction with the University of Chicago. So that shows, again, perhaps we will see a higher demand for pharmaceutical grade cannabinoids across the board. So CGMP, CFR 21, Part 211, 212. And there's very few operators out there in the business right now in the United States that are fully certified to produce those ingredients. So for over-the-counter medications, we may see progress in that direction. Now, it takes many years for those to actually come to market. But that said, once they come to market, that's a big, high dollar, high value product to bring to market. But even ahead of that, we may see just, you can't mark now, just be explicit as a marketer for consumer products, you cannot right now market CBD prevents COVID, right? Don't do that. If you're a business out there looking at this, don't do it. But the buzz has educated people about this enough that if you have a acid form cannabinoid product and you bring it to market, you can say validated CBDA acid form product for health, for generally known health benefits. And I think there's going to be more and more general conversations out in the business about this being better and better validated as more studies come out, because we're early days still on this. But if it does become validated through multiple replicate studies, it might not just be COVID. This could be a broader antiviral type implication for use as a supplement and for use as a specific over-the-counter or prescription drug, which would be a huge benefit, again, to the business overall. And John, did you want to speak to any of that? I noticed you had a comment.
Oh, you said it. This is very, very early, but the market, it gets a lot of press because it's cannabis. It's cool. It's, gets people's attention. Cannabis may cure COVID, may help treat COVID, prevent COVID, so a lot of press involved in that, and thus a lot of demand, whether or not it works or not. People are demanding acid form products in the CBD hemp market. Yeah, hopefully, at the very least, it serves to, introduce people to the fact that acid forms exist. As Steve was mentioning, a lot of people don't really know much about acid forms, or that that's how they exist in the plant, or that, you know, the government has had, or some government agency has had a patent on acid forms as antioxidants and neuroprotectants since, I don't know, the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yep, NIH, yeah, that NIH patent has been much discussed, and it's interesting because it is from the 90s. That patent is going to lapse here shortly. So very interesting that they had a lot of research data that went into that study, and enough that the government viewed it as being worth spending the money to patent. And now when that patent goes up, then the potential to publish that patent and the associated research results in association with product manufacturing becomes more feasible. And potentially what it's going to free up is the opportunity for naturopathic doctors and nutritionists and those other medical professionals to talk about the explicit advantage of using cannabinoids as an antioxidant for these neuroprotective purposes. A big point to emphasize on that is that the serving sizes that they were using, the amount of cannabinoid per day of consumption was much higher than your standard product serving size is today in the market. We're talking about hundreds of milligrams as a serving size rather than tens of milligrams, which is still somewhat the standard. And the truth that is also true when you look at these viral activity studies. They're using quite high servings or doses, and so the indication there is we may look at, even as the price of the cannabinoids continue to either stay stable or be reduced, that the volume per consumer of consumption may go up, and so that'll help the market out quite a bit. So starting to educate your consumers that it is beneficial to consume those higher doses, and that it can be cost effective for them as a consumer, I think is going to gain traction. So that's great. Steve, let's see, you want to take us away with the last
it's an out of context point, but I want to make it before, because you've only got about a minute left, if that. We were talking earlier about rebates. We were talking about the membranes. One of the things that the membranes assist you in doing is maintaining that acidic form all the way through. But the point I wanted to get across to folks is that the season to request these energy efficiency rebates is now. And you have to apply for the rebate and then buy the equipment. And people tend to do that backwards. And so I want to encourage folks, if you have any questions, you can reach out to us. We've got some access to a database, different states, programs, and we're happy to help you research that and help you through that application process.
Thank you, Steve. That's a great reminder, because again, we're talking about, tens or even in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars of savings, either in tax credits or sometimes literally in a cash rebate back to your pocket. But it requires the upfront work, and you have to work hand in hand with those rebate issuing agencies, which are usually associated with the power utility or the energy district. So come talk to us. We'd be glad to help you out in vetting whether your jurisdiction has some of those incentives. And thank you to the team, Brandon, John, Mark, Steve. Thanks so much for jumping on this week. It's really great to have the SciPhy team up front and center here. And thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today. Please reach out to us. You can find us at sciphysystems.com, at SciPhy Systems on Instagram, LinkedIn, and please look out for future episodes. We have some great content upcoming, including visits from professionals from Zyput. We have Kat Simmons, Sidco Kat, coming on to guest host in the next month. So stay tuned to sciphysystems.com and reach out to us for any of your processing needs. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great week.